Welcome to Sleepy Love Tales, soothing romance for a restful night. If these stories help you unwind, be sure to subscribe. For now, close your eyes and let's begin tonight's story. The second first date. The coffee was already brewing when Marissa came downstairs, which meant Daniel had been up for at least 20 minutes. She could tell from the smell. He liked to let it sit on the burner just long enough to develop what he called character and what she called regret. "You're going to ruin it," she said, padding into the kitchen in her robe. "I'm enhancing it. You're burning it. I'm aging it. Like wine. Like us." She laughed and reached for the cupboard, and there was her mug already on the counter, the chipped blue one she always pretended she would throw away. 2 sugars and a splash of cream were waiting beside it. He hadn't poured the coffee yet because he knew she liked to do that part herself. Something about feeling like she'd participated. After 30 years, this was the language they spoke. Small gestures, half-finished sentences, 1,000 quiet accommodations that no one else would ever notice. Daniel set a plate of toast on the table without asking if she wanted any, because he knew she did, and he knew she'd say she didn't, and he knew she'd eat half of his. "I had a dream last night," he said, settling into his chair. "We were back at the prom. God help us. You had that dress, the one with the..." He gestured vaguely. "The sequins. The sequins. And I had that haircut. Daniel, you cannot bring up that haircut at breakfast. It is too early in the morning for that haircut." "I'm just saying, we looked ridiculous." "You looked ridiculous. I looked stunning." "You did look stunning." He said it without looking up from his toast, the way he said most of the important things, like he was afraid that meeting her eyes would make the sentence too heavy to carry. "You always look stunning." Marissa felt the warmth move up the back of her neck the way it had when she was 16, and he told her, in the gymnasium parking lot under a streetlight, that he thought her laugh was the best sound he'd ever heard. She'd called him a sap then. She wanted to call him a sap now. Instead, she reached across the table and took half his toast. "What's the occasion?" she asked. "Does there have to be one? With you? Always?" He smiled. He had the kind of smile that arrived slowly, like he was thinking about whether to give it to you, and then deciding you were worth it. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Happy anniversary, kid." "Our anniversary isn't until..." "I know when our anniversary is." She took the envelope. Inside were 2 plane tickets to Boston and a printed hotel confirmation for a place called the Beacon House. She looked up at him with the expression he had been waiting for, the slightly stunned, slightly suspicious one that meant he had successfully surprised her. "Boston," she said. "Boston? We've been saying we'd go to Boston for 26 years. Daniel, I figured we'd waited long enough." She came around the table and kissed him on top of his head, which was the gesture she used when she didn't trust herself to say anything else. He caught her wrist as she pulled away and held it for a moment, his thumb against her pulse. "Just us," he said. "No kids, no work, no nothing. Just us. That's the whole plan." It was not, in fact, the whole plan, but he was a man who knew when to hold something back. That night she found him in the den looking at a photograph. She knew which one without seeing it. The prom picture. The 2 of them standing in front of her parents' fireplace, his hand at her waist as if he were not entirely sure he was allowed to put it there. She had on the dress with the sequins. He had on the haircut. "You're a sentimental man, Daniel Callahan." "I am an extremely sentimental man, Marissa Callahan, and you knew it when you married me." She sat on the arm of his chair. He held the photograph up so she could see it, and for a moment they just looked at the 2 children in it. Not their children, but themselves, which in some ways was harder. "Do you remember what you said to me in this picture?" she asked. "I said your dad was scary. You said my dad was scary, and then you said you couldn't believe I was letting you touch my waist. In my defense, I couldn't believe it. You were so nervous. I was terrified. I'd been planning my prom-asking speech for 3 weeks, and I forgot the whole thing the second you opened the door. What did you actually say? I don't even remember. You don't? No. He looked at her, surprised, almost wounded, and then he laughed. I said, "Hi, do you want to go to prom or whatever?" You did not. I absolutely did, or whatever, as if I had options, as if I wasn't going to drive my mother's car into a ditch if you said no. She laughed until her eyes watered, and he watched her with that slow smile, the one he saved for her, and somewhere in the middle of all that laughter, he made up his mind about the second part of the plan. He had been wavering. He wasn't wavering anymore. Boston received them on a Friday afternoon under a sky the colour of pewter. There was a softness in the air that wasn't quite rain, the kind of weather that made everything look like a photograph someone had taken on purpose. The cab from the airport rattled over brick streets and let them out in front of a tall, narrow building with black shutters and a brass door knocker shaped like a lion's head. "Daniel," Marissa said. This is too nice." "It's not too nice. It's too nice. You deserve too nice." The lobby smelled of cedar and old books. Their room was on the 4th floor with a window that looked down onto a street so narrow she could have called out and been heard in the building opposite. There was a bed with a white coverlet, a sitting chair upholstered in soft green, and a small writing desk where someone had left a hand-lettered card welcoming them by name. They spent the afternoon walking. They got lost twice, which was the only way Daniel ever consented to seeing a new city. He read plaques aloud in his pompous tour guide voice, inventing dates and prominent citizens with such confidence that an actual tourist stopped to listen, and Marissa had to take her by the elbow and gently explain that her husband was a liar. "I am a storyteller," Daniel said. "You told that woman that Paul Revere invented chowder." "He could have." "Daniel," in a manner of speaking. They ate chowder at a place called something Irish-sounding that Marissa promptly forgot. They split a pastry on a bench in a small park where the leaves had started to turn at the edges, brown and red bleeding inward toward green. Daniel took a photograph of her with his phone, then handed it over so she could take one of him. When she gave it back, he scrolled through both and smiled. "We should take one together." "All right." He turned the camera around and they leaned in, and he counted to 3 and the shutter clicked. "There," he said, looking at the screen as they kept walking. 30 years of photos and you have never once looked at the camera." "I'm looking at you," she said. "I noticed." She bumped her shoulder into his. He caught her hand and didn't let go. Back in the room, he had her sit on the edge of the bed and brought out a garment bag from the closet. "What's this?" "Open it." "Daniel, open it." She unzipped the bag and a fall of deep emerald silk spilled out across her lap. It was a dress, a real dress, the kind of dress she had not owned since before the children were born, the kind of dress she might once have looked at in a window and walked past because she had a grocery list in her pocket. The fabric was cool and heavy and felt like something other people wore. "Daniel, read the note." There was a small white card pinned to the inside of the bag. She unpinned it. "For the woman I have loved since I was 17, and the stranger I hope to meet tonight." She looked up at him. He had his hands in his pockets and a slightly nervous expression, the one he had worn the night before their wedding when he'd asked her, twice, whether she was sure. "I don't understand," she said, though she was beginning to. "There's a pub, about 2 blocks from here. The Harp and Lantern." "All right. I want you to go there. By yourself. Around 7. Sit at the bar." "By myself?" "By yourself. Order whatever you want. And about 20 minutes later I'm going to walk in, and I'm going to come over to you, and I'm going to introduce myself, and we're going to pretend we have never met." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at the dress in her lap and then back at him. "You want me to go on a first date with you?" "I want to take you on a first date tonight." "Daniel Callahan." "What?" "You're a ridiculous man." "I know. You're a deeply ridiculous man, and I've been married to you for almost 30 years, and you still find new ways to be ridiculous." "Is that a yes?" She set the dress carefully aside and stood and walked over to him and took his face in both her hands. He let her. He had always let her. She looked at him the way she had once looked at him in a parking lot under a streetlight, and she thought, with something that was not quite surprise, that he was still the boy with the haircut and also entirely no longer that boy, and that loving him over so many years had been like reading the same book again every year and finding a different sentence underlined each time. "It's a yes," she said. "Good. But you'd better be charming, Daniel. I have very high standards. I'll do my best. Do better than your best." She kissed him, and he held on to her a moment longer than the kiss required, and then he let her go so she could get ready. The dress fit. Of course it fit. He had been measuring her with his eyes for 30 years. He could have made it himself. She pinned her hair up and put on the earrings her mother had left her, the small gold drops that she only wore on occasions important enough to be a little afraid of. She looked at herself in the mirror. She had not, she realised, looked at herself in a mirror like this in a very long time. She had looked at herself to check for spinach, to fix her collar, to see if the grey was getting bad enough to do something about. She had not stood in front of a mirror and met herself in years. The woman in the green dress looked back at her. She was not 22. She was not even 42. She had small lines at the corners of her eyes that had been earned, every one of them, and a softness at her jaw that she had spent some time being unhappy about and had finally decided to leave alone. She was, the mirror said, a woman, just a woman. Not a mother tonight, not a wife tonight, not the person everyone called when something needed to be remembered. Just a woman in a green dress, going out alone in a city she did not know, to see what might happen. "All right, Claire," she said quietly. "Let's see what you've got." She walked out of the hotel without looking back, because she suspected that if she looked back, Daniel would be standing at the window watching her, and she did not want to start the evening by laughing. The Harp and Lantern was tucked into a side street off a side street, the kind of place you would only find if someone had told you it was there. A small painted sign hung above the door, a brass harp and a lantern, the paint a little chipped along the edges. Marissa pushed the door open and stepped into warmth. It hit her like a held breath releasing, the smell of bread and butter and dark beer, the low gold of the lamps, the sound of a fiddle from somewhere in the back, soft enough not to interrupt. The bar ran along the right side of the room, polished oak gone slightly dark with age, brass rail along the bottom, a row of stools with leather seats. Behind the bar, bottles glowed amber and copper and green. A woman behind the bar caught her eye as she came in. She had silver hair cropped short, a face full of warm intelligence, and the easy posture of someone who had been standing behind that bar for a long time, and had no intention of stopping. She smiled at Marissa as if she'd been expecting her. "Anywhere you like, love. The stools at the end are quieter." Marissa picked the second stool from the end. She set her small handbag on the bar, smoothed her dress, and tried to look like a person who did this all the time. "What'll you have?" "A Long Island iced tea, please." "Oh, that kind of night." "Maybe." The bartender smiled and went to work. Marissa watched her hands, efficient, unhurried, the movements of someone who had built 1,000 of these drinks and would build 1,000 more. "Waiting for someone?" the bartender asked, setting the glass down on a paper napkin. Marissa paused. The question landed somewhere unexpected, and she felt a small flutter of nerves she had not anticipated. "Maybe," she said again. The bartender laughed. "Good answer. The good ones are usually worth waiting for. I'll let you know. You do that." The bartender moved off to another customer, and Marissa took a careful sip of her drink and looked around. There were perhaps 30 people in the pub, couples leaning over tables, a group of men at a booth arguing happily about something, a young woman alone in a corner reading a book and drinking what appeared to be tea. No one was looking at Marissa. She was just a woman at a bar. She found, to her surprise, that she liked it. She liked the cold bar under her forearms. She liked the way the lamplight caught in her glass. She liked the music, a fiddle and a guitar now, something with a lilt to it, the kind of tune that made you want to lean your elbow on something and listen. She liked the small private adventure of having no one know who she was. She took another sip of her drink. The door opened, and cooler air came in with it. She did not turn around. She didn't have to. She knew his step. She had heard it on stairs and in hallways and walking back from the mailbox for 30 years. She would have known it in any city in the world. She kept her eyes on her drink and felt him come into the room behind her like a change in the air. He paused. She could feel him pause. She wondered with a flicker of pleasure what he was seeing, what she looked like from across the room, alone at the bar in a green dress, a woman he was about to walk over to. Then his step started again, and a moment later the stool beside her shifted, and there he was. "Is this seat taken?" She let the question sit a moment before she turned. He had loosened his tie. His hair was still a little damp at the temples from the walk over, and he smelled of rain and cedar and the cologne he'd worn since their first apartment, because she had once said she liked it. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her once in her parents' front hallway, like the door had opened on something he had not been prepared for. "That depends," she said. "Are you trouble?" He smiled, the slow one. "I've been told." "By whom?" "Reliable sources." "Then yes, the seat is taken." She paused. "By you." He laughed and slid onto the stool and they were off. He called himself Jack. He was, he said, in Boston on business. The kind of business he could not discuss without compromising several international agreements. She raised an eyebrow at this. He said he was prepared to be more specific, but only after a second drink. "And you?" he asked. "Claire. Claire. From California." What brings Claire from California to a Boston pub on a Friday night? "I'm between lives." "Between lives." I had one. I'm thinking about getting another. Ambitious. I have the time. And what are you doing here exactly while you decide? She tilted her head and looked at him for a long moment, and then she smiled, slow, the way he was always trying to make her smile. Something reckless. "I haven't decided what yet." "Well," he said, "I am at your disposal." "Are you?" "Strictly in an advisory capacity." The bartender came back with a refill she had not asked for and a fresh glass for Daniel. She set them down with the same easy economy as before, and as she went to walk away she paused and looked at the two of them. "You folks know each other?" "No," Marissa said quickly. "Just met," Daniel said. She walked away. Marissa looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Marissa. They both kept their faces very still for exactly 2 seconds, and then they both started laughing into their drinks. "Stop," Marissa said. "I didn't do anything." "You're going to get us caught." "Caught at what? We're just two strangers." "Two strangers who can't stop laughing." "That's how it starts." He clinked his glass against hers and the sound was small and bright. They ordered shepherd's pie for him, and fish and chips for her, and then they switched halfway through without discussing it, the way they had been switching plates for 30 years, and when Marissa caught herself doing it, she froze with her fork in the air. "Jack, did you just—" "I assumed you wanted some." "How would you know that?" "You were looking at it like you wanted some." "What kind of business did you say you were in?" "Observational," she laughed. He looked very pleased with himself. He told her stories. He told her he had once gotten lost in Ireland and been adopted for an afternoon by a farmer who refused to let him leave without a haircut and a goat. He told her he could speak 4 languages, 3 of them badly. He told her he had once been mistaken for a famous violinist at a hotel in Vienna and had played along for an entire dinner before someone asked him to perform. "And did you?" "I excused myself to the men's room and never returned." "That is not the action of an honourable man." "I never claimed to be honourable. I claim to be charming. Are those different? Wildly. He asked her about Claire. Claire had grown up in a coastal town she invented out of 3 different places they had been on vacation. Claire had a job that involved travel and discretion. Claire had once driven a convertible down the entire Pacific Coast Highway with a man she'd known for 48 hours and never seen again. Did you? Daniel said. Claire did. I would like to meet Claire. You're meeting Claire. I see. He picked up his glass. And what does Claire want tonight? She looked at him over the rim of her own glass. The pub had grown a little fuller, the music a little louder, the lamps a little lower, or perhaps that was only the drinks. She felt with a small, surprising clarity that she was having more fun than she had had in years. Claire, she said, is still deciding. The fiddler shifted into something slower, an old tune she half recognised, something her mother had hummed, or maybe his mother. Daniel set down his drink and stood up and held out a hand. Dance with me. Here? Here. Jack. Claire. She let him pull her to her feet. There was a small space between the bar and the wall where 1 or 2 other couples were swaying. He drew her in with one hand at her waist and one hand in hers, and she put her free hand on his shoulder, and they began to turn slowly under the amber lamps. You're a better dancer than you were at 17, she murmured. That's not Claire's line. Claire is having a moment. They turned. She could feel his heartbeat through his jacket, the same heartbeat she had fallen asleep next to 10,000 times. He smelled of rain and cedar. The fiddle climbed and fell. She closed her eyes for a moment and was 16 again, in a gymnasium full of crepe paper, dancing with a boy who had a terrible haircut and a hand at her waist as if he'd been given permission to touch something holy. Marissa, he said quietly, don't. What? Don't use my real name. You'll make me cry, and Claire doesn't cry on first dates. All right. He pulled her a little closer. They turned. The song ended too soon. He led her back to the bar without letting go of her hand. The bartender was waiting with 2 fresh drinks they had not ordered. On the house, she said. Don't argue. We weren't going to. Good. She braced her hands on the bar and looked at them. She had the kind of eyes that had read a lot of weather. Can I say something? Please. You 2 look like soulmates. You should probably start dating. Marissa choked on her drink. Daniel slapped the bar, laughing. The bartender watched them both with the expression of a woman who had seen every possible variety of human behaviour and had her own private theories about most of them. I was just thinking the same thing, Daniel said when he could speak. You're moving very fast, Marissa managed. I have a feeling about this one. The bartender said. I'll bet you do. She moved off down the bar. Marissa wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. Daniel, don't say my name. Daniel, she knows. She doesn't know. She absolutely knows. She suspects. She has concluded. He grinned. He leaned his elbow on the bar and looked at her, really looked at her, and the grin softened into something quieter. Let her conclude. Daniel. Let her, Marissa. She's right. There was a small pause. The pub murmured around them. Marissa reached up and tucked a piece of hair behind her ear, and she saw him watch her do it the way he had watched her do it when she was 15 years old, and trying to concentrate on her algebra in his mother's kitchen. You know, she said, I'm not usually the kind of woman who leaves a pub with a man she just met. No, no. What kind of woman are you? The careful kind. That's a shame. Why? Because I was about to ask if you'd come back to my hotel room. She raised her eyebrows. She let the silence sit. She had learned this from him, somewhere over the decades, the value of a held silence. You're very bold, she said, for a man I just met. I have a feeling we'd have a fantastic night together. Do you? I do. And what would we do in your hotel room? Talk, mostly. Mostly. At first, she set her glass down. She let her hand rest on the bar a moment, and then she slid it across the wood until her fingers touched his. He turned his hand over, palm up, and she laced her fingers into his. "I think," she said, "I could make an exception." He helped her down from the stool. He held her coat for her. He settled the bill while she gathered her bag, and as they turned to leave she felt the bartender's eyes on her and she looked up. The silver-haired woman gave her a slow, deliberate wink. Marissa smiled back. She could not help it. She walked out into the Boston night with her hand in her husband's hand, and she felt 17 and 50 and timeless and brand new, all at once. It was raining lightly when they reached the street. Daniel held his jacket up over her hair for the 2 blocks back to the hotel, which was completely unnecessary because the rain was barely rain, and she let him, because that was what the jacket was for. He kept stealing looks at her under it, and she kept catching him. "What?" "Nothing." "Daniel? What?" "You're beautiful." "Stop it." "You are. You're staggeringly beautiful, and I'm trying to figure out how I managed to talk you into coming back to my hotel room." "Charm," she said. "Allegedly." "Allegedly." They laughed. He squeezed her hand. The Lion's Head knocker glinted under the porch light as they came up to the Beacon House, and she thought, with a small, unaccountable lift in her chest, that she would remember the Lion's Head for the rest of her life. In the room, he set the jacket over the back of the chair. He turned to her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The lamps were low. The window glowed faintly with the wet streetlight from outside. She could hear from somewhere down the street the muffled lift of music from another bar, or perhaps the same bar, a fiddle running like water under everything. "Well," he said. "Well." Jack had a very impressive evening. Claire had a lovely time. He took a step toward her. She took a step toward him. He reached up and very gently took the pin out of her hair, and her hair came loose around her shoulders, and he held the pin in his hand a moment as if he wasn't sure what to do with it before setting it on the desk. "I have to tell you something," he said. "What?" "I was nervous tonight." "You were not." "I was. I sat in the lobby for 10 minutes before I came over. I was afraid I'd forgotten how to do this." "How to do what?" "Talk to you. As if I didn't know you. As if there was anything left to find out." She put her hands flat against his chest. She could feel his heart through his shirt. "Daniel," she said. There is so much left to find out." He kissed her. He had been kissing her for 33 years, and he still kissed her like he was getting away with something. She kissed him back the way she'd kissed him the first time, in her parents' driveway, with her father turning the porch light on and off and pretending he wasn't watching. They moved toward the bed without quite walking, the way you move in a slow dance. What followed belongs to them. It was tender and unhurried, and a little funny in the places it was supposed to be funny, the way a long marriage is funny, and somewhere in the middle of it she said his name and he said hers, and the names were the same names they had always been, and somehow also brand new. She woke to the smell of coffee and the grey light of a Boston Saturday. Daniel was at the window with 2 cups, wrapped in one of the white robes the hotel provided, his hair sticking up at the back the way it always did. She watched him for a moment without saying anything, just to keep the picture. "Stop staring," he said, without turning. "I'm not staring." "You are staring." "How can you tell?" "I can always tell." He turned and came over to the bed and handed her the coffee. He had made it the way she liked it. He had been making it the way she liked it since the Ford administration, but somehow this morning it tasted like a gift. She slid over, and he climbed in next to her with his own cup, and they sat side by side against the headboard looking at the rain on the window. "Daniel?" "Do you think Fiona knew?" "Who?" "The bartender. You named her Fiona. She looked like a Fiona. She did look like a Fiona. Do you think she knew?" He thought about it. He sipped his coffee. He looked at the rain. "Fiona definitely knew," he said. She laughed. He put his arm around her, and she put her head on his shoulder, and they were quiet for a while. "I was nervous too," she said eventually. "When I sat down, I almost left." "You did not." "I almost did. I sat there thinking, what am I doing? This is ridiculous. I'm a 52-year-old woman pretending to pick up my husband in a bar. And then what?" And then I took a sip of my drink and I thought, well, he went to a lot of trouble. The least I can do is have a good time. "And did you?" She turned her head against his shoulder and looked up at him. "I had the best time I've had in a very long time," she said. "Daniel Callahan, you're a ridiculous man, and I'm going to be married to you for the rest of my life, and I want to do that again. The pub, the first date, all of it, every year, a new one every year. You want to make a tradition of it. I want to make a tradition of it." He kissed the top of her head. He looked out at Boston, grey and dripping and beautiful, and he smiled the slow smile, the one he'd been giving her since she was 15. "Deal," he said. They flew home that Sunday with their suitcases half packed, and the green dress folded carefully in tissue at the top of hers. The house was quiet when they came in. Still the same house, with the same photographs on the walls and the same dent in the floorboard by the kitchen door, where one of the children had once dropped a bowling trophy. Daniel set down the bags. Marissa walked into the kitchen and switched on the light. He came in behind her and went to the cupboard for the coffee. She watched him reach for her mug, the chipped blue one, and set it on the counter beside his. She leaned against the door frame. "So," she said. He turned, eyebrow raised. "Do you come here often?" she asked. He looked at her a moment. The slow smile arrived. "Only when I'm hoping to meet someone interesting." She crossed the kitchen and kissed him, and the coffee could wait, and the suitcases could wait, and Boston was already 300 miles behind them and somehow still in the room. Somewhere, she thought, a woman named Fiona was wiping down a bar and shaking her head and smiling to herself about the couple from last night. Fiona definitely knew.